Hello and welcome to our weekly Parsha Shir. This year we're doing a series with the Torah of Kelm. And this week, as it is Purim, in fact, this is Shushan Purim, the day after Purim. If you live in Chutz La'aretz, of course, in Jerusalem, it's celebrated the next day, on the 15th of Adar. Then we're actually going to be talking about Purim. But there are so many exciting ideas I wanted to share with you. I hope you'll forgive me if I deviate from the Parsha and also deviate from all the Torah of Kelm, because I've got some really, really interesting, an interesting concept to share with you, which I hope you'll enjoy. But we will certainly link it to Kelm because that would be unfair not to. So I hope you're with me. If this is the day after Purim, I hope your headache is better, or your hangover, I might say. If this is Yerushalayim, and you are listening to this, then I really hope that you're having a wonderful time. And why you're listening to this instead of being out celebrating. But okay, let's move on with our dedications as we normally do. So last week, as I told you, we've got some very good news that some of the people we've been dedicating the shit for, and I'm sure you've been incorporating into your prayers, davening for them, have seen very nice progress. Yecheskel Yehuda Ben Yenta, friend and family member, or I should say, I'm a member of his family. He's a family member of mine too. He got out of hospital after 6 months of recovery, and I've been seeing pictures of him back home with his dear wife in Israel, and it really warmed my heart. And I also told you that Rafal Chai Ben Sora is doing much better as well, and that certainly cheered me up enormously. Orechaim Ben Chani Yehudis is recovering from this. This little baby is waiting for the lung transplant, is waiting for to complete recover from a viral infection. So I'm afraid he's been they pressed the pause button on him being on the transplant list or register, I think it's called in the UK, until he's fully recovered. So we'll certainly hope and daven that happens very, very quickly for him. I've not forgotten anybody. But, oh yes, there was Amram Ben Sora, who the young father who suddenly got a blood infection. We all hope that he is doing as well. My dear wife, Ita Rivka Bassima Esther, who's recovering from 2 knee replacement operations. I think I've done it. Right, let's move on to what I wanted to talk about. Do you remember just a few weeks ago, we were looking at Rabbi Rucham, the Mashgiach of Mir, and prior to that, the great Talmud of Reb Simcha Zissel. And we were looking at Chelik Beis of Das Chochmah Musa, and he was talking about time and how time worked. That rings a bell with you. And he was saying that the Medrash says there was a time for Adam Rishon to be created and put in Gan Eden, and a time for him to leave Gan Eden. And the opening question for those who want me to remind them, is on page Reish Kof Hey of Chelik Beis of Das Chochmah Musa. And the strange thing was that wasn't the reason that he got out or he was thrown out of Gan Eden. It was because he did something wrong. However, Rabbi Ruchel said an incredible thing. No, there are times set in history when certain things are going to happen, irrespective of what you are actually what I've actually done wrong. Had it been that Adam Rishon had done the thing that he did wrong, but it was not the time for him to be ejected, he would not have been ejected. There was a time for a certain thing to happen. And let me just plug you in. If I turn a page over and right in the middle of it, he says the following thing. Because in that particular time, or in any particular time, it's dictated, it was preordained from the creation of the world that certain things would happen. And you have to know that thing is going to happen anyway. The only role that you have to play is hachana. Have you got yourself ready to play a positive part in that event that's going to happen? Hasid shall call avodas ha'adam. Therefore, the fundamental, or maybe the hidden part, the thing that we don't see so obviously in our lives, is did we get ourselves ready to play the part, to be able to walk onto the field and be part of the team and maybe score the winning goal? She mechaven is something that we have to prepare ourselves. To grab that moment, carpe diem, as they say in Latin, to grab that moment when it occurs. And now that's the reason that I wanted to go back to that is because for those who have just read it in Yerushalayim, or perhaps yesterday, you will know that in the Megillah itself, there's the if you look at chapter Daled, there is the message which Mordechai sends to Esther in the palace. And what was the message he sends? I'm looking about here, floundering like crazy. Oh, there it's over here. Sorry, in our little art scroll. And if I turn to Megillus Esther there, and I turn to chapter Daled, which for some reason is not marked at the top of the page. That's a bit unusual. Anyway, Daled, and page in verse 14. So I'll read this to you in English so we can speed things up, I suppose. And he says, for if you persist, this is the message of Mordechai to Esther, if you keep your identity quiet, if you don't intervene at this moment, for if you persist in keeping silent at a time like this, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from some other place. Oh, I've got to read this in Hebrew. I hate the things in English. Because if you keep quiet at this time, then indeed, how do they translate that? I'm getting all mixed up here. Relief and deliverance. All right, Revach. I would have translated that way, right? And you and your father's household will be lost. And who doesn't know? And who doesn't know if for this time it was that was the reason that you became the queen in the first place? Now, this is tremendously interesting because this is perfectly what Rabbi Ruchman says. The time is there. Now, of course, it's going to happen. Did you, through your choices, through your freedom of choice, make positive choices that would result in you being the person to play that critical role? And if not, it can come from other places. And there's a medrash, I was trying to find it before, but I couldn't put my hand on it quickly, which says, because the message it was being sent is, Hashem has got plenty of Esthers. There's no shortage of agents or agencies that Hashem can use in order to bring about the outcome that he wants. Now, that's a very important statement. That means to say, at the beginning of Bereshit, at the beginning of creation, then, as we say in L'chod Adi, in Friday night, Saif Ma'aseh b'machshava t'chila. Hashem, when, as it were, he put pen to paper, or pen to parchment, I suppose would be a better metaphor, then he knew how the story was going to end. What role you play in that story, positive or negative, whether you took it in a positive direction, don't worry, it's going to go back. The end is already written. It's just, what role did you play? Did you prepare yourself to be the person who could play a positive role? And that's the message that we saw in Rabbi Rucham. Times are going to occur. Events are programmed into the story of the universe, into the human story. What freedom of choice did you deploy throughout your lifetime that could have brought you to the person to play a positive role? Now, this idea, I want to take you to an Alshach. So Moshe Alshach, and this is I find this very exciting. Moshe Alshach, this is commentary on Nevi'im and Kesuvim. So we moved into Tanakh now, or Nach now, and this is in Mishli, and it's in page 30, chapter 31, and it's in verse Yud Aleph, and everybody knows this. Well, everybody. That's a ridiculous thing to say, but it's very well known, I should say. Yeshivas Kelm means sung, of course, every Friday night. And then husbands sing this to their wives, and it talks about it. Really, is a metaphor for Shabbos. Shabbos is the bride, but even though Shabbos is the bride, and there's deeper levels to what it's talking about, but it doesn't escape its simple meaning, which is a man singing to his wife. And that's what the Alshach says here. So I want to read this to you because I think it draws all the strands that we've already been talking about into a very, very interesting direction to create a tapestry, which I think you'll enjoy. To understand what this pasuk is talking about, I want to quote from to a Zohar. And even though Zohar sounds all very, exciting and mystical, it's a well-known fact. Al Dover Zivug Isha Isha. It's talking about the marriage of a man to his wife. That's something, again, we spoke about just 2 weeks ago, I think, about that if a marriage is based in Torah, then a man and a woman are going to be blessed with children, etc. There was all the, if you remember, the dimensions of the box, the golden box in which the Ten Commandments was contained, the lid thereof is called the Kapporos. That was a hint, or the measurements, the structure, the materials used to build it was actually a metaphor for marriage between a man and a wife. So he says it's a well-known fact. The Zohar says when it comes to the marriage of a man and a wife, boy hadover hu inyan maimer sin zamer. It says in the Gemara, kan zivug rishon, kan zivug sheni, that it talks about the first marriage and the second marriage of a man and a wife. The first and the second marriage of a man and a wife. Now, Yaakov Avinu had 2 wives, in fact 4 wives. It's not uncommon. In fact, it's common enough that I am somebody who was in a second marriage. My late wife, Shalom, passed away after 5 years struggle with cancer, and I'm remarried. I have been for the last 18 years. So it's not uncommon for a person to be married twice, sometimes even more. So this is what's normally known as and referred to as Zivug Rishon, the first Zivug. Now, Zivug is the other half of a soul. We'll come to this in a second. And Zivug Shenie. So the first marriage or the second marriage, or maybe we could say the first pairing and the second pairing, the pairing of 2 souls. And so he wants to discuss this idea, a marriage between a man and a woman, if it happens twice. Right? Somebody's been married 2 times. So it's very strange, says the Alshach, that the first one would seem to be, as it were, the product of heaven. Now, pause. What's he saying? He's saying that before any soul comes to this world, he's only, or she is only half a soul. Really, if we go right back to the beginning of creation, when Adam Rishon was taken, and he was one being, both male and female. So, of course, as we know, Hashem takes the female side out of Adam Rishon, makes an independent creature. She, an independent creature in her own right, and then the male creature remains. What about the soul? Well, the soul also is split in 2. And that's the general model, as the Zohar says, and Talmud says, that we are only half a person until we find that other person who's out there, who was the one that we were predestined to marry. So when I was teaching this in the seminary, I taught in an yeshiva, I taught in last week. I drew 2 little clouds. Don't know why they're clouds. Why a soul should be like a cloud, I don't know. With the little female symbol in one, which of course is the circle with this cross thing coming out of her. And then the other one is the circle with a sort of arrow coming out of it. Actually, just thinking about it, one's a sword and one's a sword handle and an arrow. Well, if you don't know Hashem running through your marriage, maybe that's exactly how it's going to be. But anyways, these 2 clouds, they're up in Shemaim, and they are 2 halves of the whole, of one whole. And they are perfect for each other. And I could tell you all the Kabbalistic places that souls come from, but let's leave that for another time. And these 2 little clouds that I then drew on the smartboard, just showing off that I use a smartboard. When I started off, it was called a blackboard. Anyway, so these 2 clouds, I made sort of little dots, and that's it coming down to Earth. And then, of course, they rediscover themselves. Each himself, who can find the other half of their soul. And we've got this idea that 40 days before the creation, even the creation, the conception of a child in his mother's womb, then the heavenly voice shouted out, cried out, and said, Bas Pliny Pliny, this girl will marry this body. And of course, the other way about as well. So that's the way it should be. Now, we normally therefore think of Zivug Rishon as being a chronological statement. The first wife or husband, the second wife or husband. But it's not that. The first one is, as it were, if I can use this phrase, the ideal one, the one that was meant to be chosen, the one that was meant to be there. And that is going to come to Earth and hopefully find each other and get married. However, as soon as you enter this world, you're entering a world of bechira, of choices. So if it was a nice, easy journey, and then they find each other when they're 19, 20, 21, whatever it is, that would be perfect. But what if this one, the male and the female, let's make it the male, because he seems to talk about the male, unless he deviates, and he goes off in a different direction. then of course, who is she going to marry? Well, she's going to marry Zivug Shenie, right? Zivug Rishon, Zivug Shenie. So the ideal marriage is going to be to the first one. But what if the first one has now gone in a totally different direction and his life choices and lifestyle is utterly now incompatible to that woman? Then you can't leave her not married. So she will be married to somebody else. And I think at that stage, I will read to you the Alshik so you get a full flavor. And I think this is really, really worth listening to. So he says, as we said before a person is born, a heavenly voice says, this one is perfect for that one. Because after all, they were one to begin with. One soul split in two. Because they've completely and perfectly matched and chosen the perfect match for his soul to the other. But from the time, no, he tells you so. I'll just translate that. That souls come from under the Kisei HaKavod, under Hashem's throne. That's where Jewish souls come from. Because there is no such thing in the creation that doesn't have its perfect match. That each one can contribute, be the mashpia and mushpa, the one who is influences positively the other and is influenced by the other. There is a symbiotic relationship between husband and wife. Okay. And then he says, now, in the exact same way as two physical beings are half of each other and come together in marriage to produce, as it were, the next generation. But two souls that come together, not only do they perfectly complement each other, they produce through life as well. So he says, Magam al yidei toiv kavona and as long, therefore, if they're both in the same direction, go back to my two little clouds, as long as they're moving in the same direction, that's the perfect match. That the parallel of the physical union is matched to the spiritual union. Okay. That means, therefore, Hashem doesn't send us alone into the world. We're given a companion. Each one complements and perfects and corrects each other. Fine. Because both of them come from the same source. And that would not occur. They would not complement each other if they were from two different sources, two different backgrounds entirely. No, they are the same thing. Then they would not be able to complement each other. So that's why, before they come here, then the announcement is said, hey, we've got two souls coming to the world who are absolutely perfect for each other. And there's no argument about that, because we made them perfect for each other. But now they've got choice. Have they continued that perfection, that parallel, that complementary nature? Also, he says, what happens if not? Therefore, he says, and that's called the first Zivug. But since a human being has got freedom of choice, then by definition, that freedom of choice, then that might mean that they deviate and go in different directions and are no longer compatible. So therefore, he says, it might be that she remains loyal, and the assumption, notice the Alshach assumes she, the woman, will remain loyal. You can't allow this girl to be not married. So what's he going to do instead? Then what he's going to do instead is so the person who was perfect for her, and she was perfect for him, but he's no longer perfect for him, so somebody else who is, again, I'll read to you the Hebrew because it's important, then by ish asher ovda acheres, ovda, the man who has lost her, that's the perfect shidduch for her, who has now lost her because of his choices, then acheres yichakloi, another man who will take her, lefi masav, who is appropriate for her, but as a matter of his choice. He's made himself that way. So he didn't start that way, but he's chosen to move into her orbit. He was over there, and he's now the person who would complement her, but not in the exact same way as the ideal one from heaven. So Zivug Rishon is the ideal. Zivug base, Shenie, is, as it were, not as ideal. Now, let me make it quite clear at this point, so people don't start biting their fingernails. That doesn't mean to say that if, and clearly chronologically, Zivug Rishon could be the second marriage, and Zivug Shenie could be the first marriage. It doesn't mean to say it's not a good marriage. It doesn't mean to say there's anything wrong with the children. Suppose you wanted to learn to play the piano, and you could have me as your piano teacher, or you could have Rachmaninoff. Well, I assume, as I don't play the piano, apart from chopsticks, I assume that you would do better with Rachmaninoff as your teacher. And so it's the same thing here as well. The ideal teacher will bring out the most in you. Well, let's assume that the person with the first husband would have reached perfection really quite quickly. Well, that doesn't mean to say that if he dies, she can't marry again. Maybe there's still work to do. And as it were, the finishing off might be by the second husband or the other way around. We'll come back to that in just a second. Let me read on a little bit because it's an important point to say here. Therefore, he says, so therefore, if it's the case that the ideal husband, has now gone off in a different direction, where it said, therefore, he will now have lost that perfect marriage because he's off partying somewhere in Ibiza. That's Spain, by the way. Okay, he talking nach Razal, and the rabbis express that in the perfectness of their prose and language. That's why the rabbis say that it's the way of a man to search after his lost limb. The thing is lost, i.e., the wife, the other half of him. But if you've lost something, it means you must have had it in the first place. If a man meets a woman for the first time, how does that poetic idea of the rabbis, he's searching after something he's lost? He never had it. Yes, he did. He had it in heaven, but lost it as a consequence of his choices. Therefore, if that's the case, then Yeshivas Kelm, says the Alshik, who can find the white woman, the Yeshivas Kelm, the one that he lost as a consequence of his choices? That's what that means. Good stuff, huh? Miyaz kesher ma le'ishes chal imo ish asher hu ben zivoge basiris men lefi ma'asav. But Hashem never abandons the possibility of that connection, which was, after all, designed to be the perfect connection between the two being reestablished. And this is it. Ish shelocha ve'ikeno ben zivoge asher of the azmatikina. And how would that happen? Then it might be the case that the second marriage, then Hashem will, as it were, take that fellow's soul back again to heaven, because the ideal husband has now come back from his diversion from Torah and made himself appropriate for her again. Hashem will remove that second husband, the Zivug Shenie, now making room for the Zivug Rishon. Now, obviously, that sounds absolutely appalling. Could it possibly be that Hashem is going to do something so unkind as, I hate to use the word, bearing in mind that Prince Harry, I hate to use the word Prince Harry, as a matter of fact, but he wrote a book called Spare, seeing himself as the spare because he's not going to be the king. No, now you're not. Anyway, but basically, this is a spare, this is the second best. He's a good fellow. We already said that he was able to marry this woman because he, through his choices, made himself almost identical to the person who should have been the husband who went off at a tangent. Why would Hashem do that? So here's the idea. Going back to my playing the piano, you'll learn better with the best teacher. It doesn't mean to say you won't learn a lot from a good teacher. And you mustn't what's that phrase in English? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There could be a fabulous marriage and fabulous contributions that couple can make to the Jewish people, even though it wasn't the first choice, the ideal choice. And if you think about it, one of the greatest rabbis of all time was somebody called the Arizal, the great Kabbalist, who lived in Sfas. And the Arizal died at the age of 36. So when he died at the age of 36, does that mean to say when somebody dies young, there's something wrong with them? Clearly not. Maybe they reached perfection at an early age. So maybe that's so, and that's what the Alshich says. Of course, he lived in Sfas, and the Arizal was his Talmud. Maybe what exactly the point that's being made here is that that soul who married the second choice, who was obviously a superior woman, he has to get to her level. She perfected him much more quickly. She allowed him to achieve greatness as a Jew, or maybe go back to my metaphor of a pianist, at a much younger age than would normally be the case. And now he can play on his own. And now this fellow, the Arizal, 36, and got to Shemaim. He's done his job. And then with that vacancy, then the guy who the wife could have married first comes and takes that place. And this sounds a little bit still maybe problematic. Remember, there's a beautiful song, maybe you've heard it from, I forgot the name of the fellow. He writes lots of nice contemporary Jewish songs. It's called Little Neshama. It tells the story of a soul in heaven, and the soul doesn't want to come down, and the angel comes along and says, "Come with me, little Neshama." It's very sweet. And the soul doesn't want to go. And the angel assures the soul that it can handle this. And then eventually, after a lifetime, the angel comes back to take the soul back to heaven. I don't want to go again. And it's really very, very, very nice idea. But the point is, you're only here in order to perfect yourself with the help of your spouse, the other half of you. He didn't have his perfect, or she didn't have her perfect, perhaps, Zivug. But if she is such a powerful woman and allowed that fellow to spiritually grow, then maybe he reached perfection at the age of only 36, and it wouldn't be the only one who does so. And then, of course, the soul wants to go back to Shemaim. We say, that little soul crying to the angel, "I don't want to go." We say the reason a baby is born, says the Talmud, baby is born, cries when it's born, I should say, is because the soul doesn't want to be here. Of course, the nurse, the midwife, gets a little spank on its bottom to make sure that its lungs are clear and it's breathing, causing the crying. But even without being spanked, babies often cry. And from a spiritual point of view, is a symbol of the fact, or a symptom perhaps, the baby doesn't want to be here. And to go back to where we come from a soul's point of view, that's the greatest thing. The Nachman of Breslov famously said, "I so wish if you knew," he told his Chassidim, "how much I long to cast off this garment." And the garment he was talking about was his physical body, to go back to Shemaim. And imagine that a person has perfected themselves in a short space of time and can go back straight away. And therefore that soul, that vacancy can now be filled with the original soul, who's now come back to himself and back to her as the appropriate Zivug from the Zivug Rishon. So let me read a little bit more of that to you. So he says, Hashem will allow that person to pass away. So we said that Hashem will have her marry the person who has got to be appropriate for her, who his choices, or Hashem has fixed a certain amount of time for him to be here. Because, and now he goes into, this is interesting stuff, Hashem has decided that person is going to die at that time, not as a punishment, knowing that this person who has already made an upward trajectory to make himself worthy, he's the Zivug Shenie, of marrying that woman, will continue that, and now that's it. It's time for him to come back, not as a punishment. Therefore, and now the other one can be married to her. As the rabbis say, because of the sins of the father, the children die when they're young. What? Because of the sins of the father, the children die when they're young. Now we know that's absolutely not the case. This is a Rashi on the pasuk. We don't the pasuk in the Ten Commandments. We don't believe that children die because of the sins of their father. But he's talking kabbalistically. The first time a soul comes to this world is called an av. Any subsequent reincarnation is called a tolda, a generation or child. What the rabbis are saying, that children die young as a result of the sins of the father. The sins of the father is the time the soul was here the first time. The soul hasn't perfected itself in that first life. In the second life, it's here because of the sins of the father, of the sins of itself that it did in a previous reincarnation or incarnation. And now, in maybe a short space of time, that small amount of continual repair work can be achieved, and maybe a child can go straight back to heaven. That's the same idea as our soul coming down. So that's the idea here. So therefore, why does it say Yeshivas Kelm? And then Baruch Mikra, and the value of a woman is more than pearls, extremely expensive. Who can afford that? It means the man in his lifetime, will he actually make sure he is worthy to be married to the girl that was set aside for him, the perfect match for him, or did he do what so many young men do, stupid stuff, and lose that opportunity? In other words, just as we said before, have you made yourself perfect to grab the moment that comes along, the moment to marry the girl, the other half of your soul, or have you taken a deviation or took a deviation, a shortcut as you probably believed it to be, which ended you up in the ditch, and therefore you missed that opportunity when the time was there for you. Same idea as we said before. Now let's conclude as this is, as I said at the beginning of the share, this is Purim in Yerushalayim. It's the 15th of Adar. Yesterday was Purim outside Yerushalayim. But in the Mishnayos of Megillah, then in the first Mishnah, it talks about the various times that you can read the Megillah. And it says one should be the 14th and one should be the 15th. Now, the Bar Tanura, the classic commentator on the Mishnah here, he asks an interesting question. When the rabbis decided which date to fix the reading of the Megillah, it said, if you live in a city that was walled from the time of Yeshua's conquest of the land of Israel, then Purim, the Megillah, should be read on the 15th. If it's a city which wasn't walled, like New York, where I live, then at that time, then it's on the 14th. And the Bar Tanura asked the obvious question, well, why do they say if you live in a city that was walled from the time of Yeshua? Why not say if you live in a city that was walled from the time of Mordechai and Esther? After all, that's the Purim story. Make it then. And he says here an astonishing thing. I think this is so fabulous. He says, the reason they chose that is Kedei L'cholak Koved L'Eretz Yisrael. The reason they chose that was to give koved, to give honor to the land of Israel. Because at the time of Mordechai and Esther, then of course Eretz Yisrael had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian conqueror of the land of Israel. The houses were empty. The land was desolate. There was no crops being grown there. It was devoid of population, a bit like the land of Israel was at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. And of course, that's a famous book, what's called by Mark Twain, The Innocents Abroad, in which he made a pilgrimage through the Holy Land from Lebanon all the way down, and said from Lebanon all the way down to the Galilee, he saw one tree. But then it changed. But at that stage, the land of Israel was probably the same. The rabbis fixed that the different date for reading the Megillah should be from the time of the conquest of Yeshua. Then, if the city was walled from the time of Yeshua's conquest, then that's you read it in the 15th to give honor to the land of Israel. You know what it's saying here? It's saying that the rabbis were absolutely, at the time of Mordechai and Esther, when this whole thing comes about, they backdated it that in the 15th, if you live in a city that was walled from the time of Yeshua's conquest, then you read it in the 15th. Not at our time. They wanted to give honor to the land of Israel at Yeshua's conquest, to let you know, even though the land of Israel is desolate and no Jews are living there, we're all in exile, there will be a time when Jewish children's voices will be heard playing once again in the land of Israel. And those empty houses in Yerushalayim will be filled with sounds of laughter and song as well. There will be such a time. So the question, which we said at the beginning, is when this time, which is predestined to happen, and in our lifetime has already happened, Did you play a part? Are you playing a part to make sure that you can be part of that story of the rebuilding of the Jewish people in the land of the Jewish people in Jerusalem? Or is that all just going to happen when you've gone off a totally different angle, into a different area altogether of life and lost that opportunity? So I think it's a nice way to end our little share, and hope to see you next week when we will go back again to reading the Parsha. And I wish you all a Freilich and Purim, and as they say in Yiddish, a ganz Jahr Freilich, an entire year of laughter.